Tonight, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Tonight, we're going to be looking at how to inventory or make an inventory that focuses on our emotional dependency. Now, let me once again put this whole thing in a context. We've talked about how each step kind of works on this principle of creating a charge that then is discharged in the step that follows it. And so step one, the charge that was created when we realized that we were powerless and that that our lives had become unmanageable, and especially when we're looking at emotional sobriety, that the way that we were coping with life, the expectations we had, were putting the cart before the horse, which created a lot of unmanageability in our life. So when we realized that, it created an existential crisis for us. And the crisis being that we no longer wanted to do what we were doing because it wasn't working, but we didn't have anything new available to us. And that created this existential crisis. Existential anxiety goes along with an existential crisis. So we need to resolve that. We just can't live with that anxiety. Any of you that have suffered from any kind of an anxiety attacks, you know how unbearable it can be to have anxiety. So we have this charge of this existential angst, right, that needs to be resolved. And that's where step two comes along and gives us hope. It's step two is about that we can be restored to sanity, and just sanity that we can learn how to live a much better life than we're living. That's the message. But now, even the idea that we can live a better life doesn't solve the problem. So there's still this charge that we have to deal with. We have to go into some kind of an action. And that's what we're invited to do in step three, where we make a commitment. So step three is about making a commitment. That forms the foundation of our program, those first three steps. Now we've made a commitment, but a commitment, is followed up by some tangible evidence that we're really committed. And that's what we're asked to do in step four, made a searching and fearless moral inventory. We talked about what that means to make a fearless moral inventory in previous weeks. Tonight, and we talked about moral instead of thinking of it as right or wrong, I said, let's think about it as what's toxic in our life and what's nourishing, right? And our emotional dependency is something that is toxic. Freud is noted as saying that we are being lived by the forces within us. And this is one of the forces that has been living us for a long time, this emotional dependency. And the emotional dependency essentially says, I'm okay if our life becomes based on a contingency. I'm okay if things turn out a certain way. I'm okay if I get that job. I'm okay if Susie Valinsky wants to give me a kiss at research or at recess at school. I was going to do some research with Susie Valinsky if she did give me a kiss. That's the bottom line. So that's what we're seeing here, right? Is that we have to deal with this emotional dependency and become aware of it. And I talked earlier about how awareness is such an important part of achieving emotional sobriety, especially becoming aware of who we are and who we aren't. Who we are is I'm emotionally dependent. I cannot change being emotionally dependent until I own that. It's the paradoxical theory of change, is you cannot change something by trying to be someone you're not. I become honest when I admit I'm a liar. I find a way to find some new power in my life in terms of dealing with alcohol or my alcoholism or drug addiction when I admit I'm powerless. The paradoxical theory of change is so important to this. And that, in that spirit, we turn to what we're going to talk about tonight, is understanding the effects of emotional dependency in our life. Now, many of us that have worked a program in AA or NA or OA or Al-Anon or whatever our 12-step orientation is taken a very, depending on the group, if you've gone with Herb, there's a very rigorous process to it. but it takes a look at looking at your resentments, a sex inventory, etc. Well, tonight we're going to talk about taking an emotional inventory. Now, how do we do that? Well, let me just share my screen and show you this form I'm suggesting that is available for you to use. It's downloadable. This is an open source on my website. So now I think you can see this emotional sobriety inventory. And I will ask Glenn and Karen to unmute yourselves at this time so that you guys can chime in as we go through these columns. So as you can see, there's 5 columns. And I'm going to explain each of these columns and ask Karen and Glenn to weigh in terms of what they've experienced with people that have been working with this. And of course, I'll share the experience I've had. So the first thing we need to do is we need to become good at describing a situation. And when I said describe an upsetting event, what I mean by that is don't put your interpretations of what happened in it. Well, I walked in the house and my wife was upset because of something that happened earlier in the day that she never talked to me about. So she said this to me. Well, that may or may not be true. But what we're doing in column 1 is just saying, I walked into my house and my wife said, where have you been? That's all you need to do. In column 1, it's like you are observing the situation you were in. Now, of course, we can't make an immaculate perception, and the way you observe it is going to be influenced and colored by who you are and how you think and all that other stuff. We're not looking for a perfect observation. We just want a description of what happened. The description that I use in my book, 12 Smart Things, I said this gentleman walked in his house after being at an AA meeting and getting a 6-month chip. He walked in and held up his chip, and his wife was sitting on the couch watching Bones. And he says, honey, I got my 6-month chip. And she looked up at him and said, so what? And then he stormed upstairs, quite upset about that she didn't celebrate his 6-month chip. So you can see that in column 1, it's described the upsetting events. So what I was saying in my book, I talk about this gentleman that walked home, had a 6-month chip, raised it to his wife. She's watching Bones. He says, honey, I've got my 6-month chip. And she says, so what? And he was very upset, and he went upstairs and slammed the door. So that's column 1. So what I want you to do as we're going through this thing, I want you to start thinking about something that upset you. Either today, it could be at any point in your life. It may be some unresolved issue, even from your childhood. It doesn't matter, but anything that bothered you, and like I said, whether it was a big deal or not. And so make a note of that, just so that you can, in your mind, describe that situation. Now, in this, do you want to say anything about that, Glenn and Karen, before I move on to column number 2?
Keep it simple.
It is pretty simple when you do it. The big thing that I've seen is that people just try to project too much of an interpretation into what's going on. And at that point in time, it's just mainly describing the situation. I said this, she said that. Then I said this, and then she said that. It's that kind of a thing where you're just reporting what is. Glenn, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Well, what I'd like to do is I will describe a complete event all the way through the worksheet.
Okay, why don't we do that at the end then, okay?
It'd be a great way to do it. After you get done describing the column.
Sounds great. That would be very helpful.
Okay.
That would be very helpful. Okay, so the second column is you want to put in what your reaction was. So how did you respond to the situation? What meaning, and I didn't write this in here, and I'm going to be editing this and revising it and include it. The first thing I would say is, what meaning did you give that experience that you had? What did it mean to you? Then I would say, how did you respond to it? What did you do? Did you withdraw? Did you get angry? Did you try to control the other person or the situation you're in? What were you feeling at the time? And that's going to relate to the meaning that you gave to it. So what did you say? What did you do? Sometimes maybe you didn't say anything, and maybe you just went out, left the house, and went and took a walk. Or maybe you went and opened up the refrigerator and ate a pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream, or whatever you did at that particular time in reaction to what just happened. And this becomes an important thing, because when you look at your reaction, I will encourage you to think about looking at it in one of three ways. Did you move against? Did you move towards? Or did you move away from? So when we say we move against, it means that I either rebelled against the other person, or I tried to control the other person. And I might have just tried to control them verbally, by raising my voice, by trying to convince them that they were wrong. We want to look at, how did you move against that person? Some people move against people physically, and they become physically threatening, and they grab the other person and shake them and say, you got to do things my way. It could go to that degree. Moving towards the other person is where what we call, it's a self-erasing solution. It's where you erase yourself. So you'll say something like, oh, I'm terribly sorry that you're upset. What can I do to make this situation right? When you didn't do anything, maybe they were just upset, but you feel bad that they were upset with you. And now you want to apologize. I'm so sorry that you're upset, that you end up taking responsibility for their feelings. You feel responsible for what they're feeling and what they're doing. That's the moving towards someone. It's people pleasing. The third response is the moving away from them, is to withdraw, to cut yourself off emotionally. You could say things like, I don't want to be in toxic relationships anymore. That person's really not a good friend. Whatever idea you come up with that can justify the cutoff. Maybe you'll just cut them off and not talk to them. You'll go silent. You'll give them the silent treatment. That's the moving away from. So we want to understand, write down our reaction so that we can categorize our reaction along those three different categories, all right, or within those three different categories. So that's what happened, and that's how I reacted. So first column is what happened. Second column is how I responded. All right, so it's the what and how of it. Very important that you're clear on that, because it's very important to see what the next two columns, how they're influencing your behavior. So now we go back to this idea that Bill Wilson had, is that it's a spiritual axiom that no matter the cause, every time I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. And this is now where we get into understanding our disturbance. So that's columns 3 and 4. So if every time I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me, it begs the question, well, what's wrong? Well, start poking around in your expectations. What expectation did you have? I call that here. So column 3 is exploring your expectations. I like to think about it as, what is my unenforceable rule? What demand or claim am I making on that other person? So the guy I described that came home with the chip, and his wife said, what, so what? He goes upstairs, he starts fantasizing and drinking towards her. That would have been moving against. He decided he would not do that because that's not good for him. It's not only going to hurt her, but it's like me drinking poison to get at you. So he had a little wisdom that came in and said, instead of drinking, he was going to give her the cold shoulder for the next couple of days. Well, if she's saying so what to the chip, I'm not so sure she's going to be that upset about him not talking to her. But that was what he came up with. I'm just going to withdraw. Now, what was his unenforceable rule? Now, you can get to the unenforceable rule by asking yourself a question like, well, what should that person have thought or done or said or felt to make me feel more loved, to make me feel more self-esteem, to validate me, to show me more respect? So if you ask that question, or if he asks that question, what should she have done? Well, she should have celebrated that he got 6 months. That was his demand. But it was even much more self-centered than that, because he wanted her to celebrate his 6 months, regardless of what that 6 months meant to her. You see, the other part of that story was that this was the third time this guy got a 6-month chip. And his wife wasn't about ready to jump up and celebrate, because she had done that a few times before and she had been disappointed and devastated. And she wasn't ready to get on that bandwagon and start banging her drum. So the unenforceable rule or demand always is just considering what we want, what we'd like, what we demand, and does not have any awareness of the other person. When we make these demands, the other person becomes an it, not a person. They're no longer a subject to us. They are some object that we want to get something from because we think we need that to be okay. So his unenforceable rule was, I want her to feel good about what I'm doing, regardless of what it means to her. Well, great, huh? That's not much of a rule that people can live by. That doesn't seem to work. That's not going to be very nourishing to her, right? That's one of those toxic rules that we talk about. Remember this inventory? We're taking a searching and fearless moral inventory. We're trying to find out what behavior is toxic. These unenforceable rules are toxic because they do not have any respect for the other person, only for us. What is his unhealthy dependency underlying her reaction? Well, the value of his recovery and what he was doing was dependent on his wife saying, good boy. He was looking for her to give him a pat on the back and say, wow, it's just so wonderful what you're doing, honey. And if he would have gotten that from her, then he would have felt better about what he was doing. So what he was doing was dependent on his wife celebrating his recovery. That the value of what he was doing was dependent on that. That's that contingency, living life in this mode of being contingent upon other people to be okay. So those are your first 4 columns. That's the inventory we need to be able to take. Now, the last column is the column that we could call that the emotional sobriety, the moment of emotional sobriety. Because when you do what's in the last column, you're going to achieve emotional sobriety. This example I just gave is that this gentleman needed to step back, live in the pause for a minute, and say, what am I really doing this for? Am I doing this for my wife to feel good about it? Or do I have a problem that I want to straighten out in my life? And I hope at some point she can appreciate that and celebrate it. But my recovery is my recovery. This is for me because I want to get well and I want to live a better life. Now I will turn this over to Glenn and Garen.
Thank you, Alan. My name's Glenn. I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. I live in the Detroit area. I've been in recovery for about 12 years. And what I've done over time is I've started using this worksheet and this inventory with my sponsees when we do the 4th step. I found that having a discussion around dependencies, you might discuss harm and the other resentments and fears and sexual things as a result of a 4-step inventory. But having a specific discussion about dependencies is very healthy and revealing. And I'd like to share an example with you with one of my sponsees with one of his 4 steps and how a single event plays out in a couple of places. In terms of describing the event, He was managing a project at work that involved a lot of people, and it wasn't going well. So to the second column, his reaction, of course, he was very discouraged about it. And he, had in his mind that he never wanted to work with these people again. That was the running strategy that Alan referred to, running away from it. Now, his unforceable demand here in the third column was that he really expects everything to go perfect. He set out a plan. He expects things to go well for them to listen to him. But the fourth column is that the unhealthy dependency in the situation is that he takes it personally. What he does is he takes it from the standpoint that they don't respect him, they don't care about him, they're not listening to him, and so the project isn't going well, and he's drawing the conclusion that he's a bad person because of that unhealthy dependency. He relies too much on the outcome of the projects and the way people treat him for his own well-being. And what we had a discussion around, which is important, was his part in the situation. And that's, of course, part of the fourth step. But one thing was to stand back from it, not take it personally. But more important was to look at what role he might have had in creating the situation. For example, did he lay out the goals well? Were the people assigned to their task or their part of the project properly? Was he following up and reporting enough in it? Because it could be all of those things. It might have been that he took on a job that was more complex than he was used to. But the point here is it would have gone a lot different for him if he didn't have such a personal dependency on the project and those people for his well-being. If you take that fourth column and subtract out the unhealthy dependency, he would have a more objective view of things. But we walk into situations with that, and it's blinding sometimes. Now, I'm going to take that same situation. Now he walks in the door at home. Now we're back to column one. He walks in the door. He's not feeling well about things. He says to his wife, I have this project, it's going down the can at work. It's no good. And she just is working on something on a PC at her desk and doesn't look up. She goes, oh, and she keeps working on what she's working on. And we're to column two now. His reaction is, come on, don't you love me? Don't you love me? Don't you care? I'm having a bad day at work. And she's off actually working on something very important, like helping somebody do their fourth step or something of that nature. But to column three in this, the unenforceable demand here is that I'm king. The unenforceable demand is I'm king. She should come perk up and turn around and go, honey, what's the problem? Can I help? And that's just not a realistic enforceable demand. To put that on somebody all the time, like I'm king, you need to show me proper deference. And then the unhealthy dependency in the fourth column is because she doesn't pay attention to me, she doesn't love me. And she doesn't love me because she won't turn around and perk up and say, Glenn, what's wrong, man? Can we talk through this? And drop everything she's doing. And that's an unhealthy dependency, to have my well-being and my feelings dependent on her reaction to me. And if I take that to the fifth column, what I need to do is be more self-soothing. I need to be in a position that I'm more realistic with other people about their reactions and that they have priorities in their life. And I'm not King Glenn. I'd like to be. I'm really King Baby. I think they described it in the AA literature. So that's how we use it. We use that kind of thing. I was using the example coming from my sponsee's fourth step, but I think it illustrates it for you. That's what I have for you, Alan.
Yeah, very illustrative. And what I really want to emphasize, and thanks, that's why I love doing this stuff with you and Karen, because you remind me of so many important things. what Glenn was saying, that fourth column really is about taking things personally. Is right? Is that's what happens, is you're taking things personally, because the rule is it's all about me. And then when it's not all about me, we take it personally, and that's the dependency. And I really like how you tied that in, Glenn, because that's right on. Because that's what happens, is we take that so personally. Karen, do you want to add to that, or just?
Yeah, well, I'll just go through a quick example because I do the same thing with sponsees and Al-Anon. Last week, somebody said, doing this inventory, do I need a new sponsor? And you suggested that they work it through with their sponsor. And that's what I do. After we do the steps, traditions, concepts, we get the book, 12 Smart Things to Do When the Booze and Drugs Are Gone. And I want to caution people that what I found is that introduction is really, really important to go through almost word for word together, because it has all the information about what my unhealthy demands are, emotional dependence, and unreasonable expectations, and Bill's letter and unpacking Bill's letter, because I think it makes it easier to then get into the inventory. So what I put together was an idea, was a composite of things I've heard from codependent people. This is not me, this is a composite of stories that I've heard that we've used this form. So the first part is the upsetting event. I'm taking this as the person is the mother of an adult son, and the son has been in and out of treatment, doesn't live at her home, but she's pretty sure that he's using drugs and drinking again. So the upsetting event is that her son calls her asking for money. He sounds unsteady, so she gets freaked out. But she gives him a big lecture telling him what he's doing wrong, and tells him what he should do. You know, you should stop drinking, you should get a job, all this stuff. But eventually she does give him the money. So her reaction to this then, how did she feel? Her reaction is she starts obsessively thinking about her son. She feels remorse for herself for caving in. She gave him the money, fear for her son, and she feels like a failure as a mother. She's angry that he's not following her advice. So the next column, my unenforceable rule or demand, is her expectations. I have the expectation that I have the ability to control my son's drinking and drug use. And I'm the authority here, and he should be listening to me. So then the next column, the unhealthy dependency that's underlying, is the idea that if you loved me, you would do what I say. And I've heard this line a lot. I can only be as happy as my most unhappy child, so I don't deserve to be happy either. So at this point, I would go through several of these ideas. You know, they list several different events, and we look for the patterns that you discussed about moving against people, moving towards, or moving away. In this situation, the mother is trying to control. She's moving against it. And then going through the rest of the book explains the ideas of how to stay centered. And in this case, in order to remain balanced, she needs to stop pressuring her son to change and start looking at herself and decide how she needs to change. So we start looking at tools that would help in that situation, would be like how to set healthy boundaries, how to have healthy communications, and try and work and develop more skills in that area. So that's just an example from the codependent side.
That's fantastic. Well, let me turn this meeting over to Thom here for a few minutes. Keep recording.
Oh, I didn't even know that you were going to have me talk today, because I knew that Glenn and Karen were going to do this. So, but as always, if you ask me to speak, obviously I have something to say. And mainly what I would say about what this discussion has been is just how much I like it. I really appreciate you, Karen, and you, Glenn, both for the work that you do. And one of the things that I get from that, and is just how because sometimes it's not about precision. Sometimes it's, sometimes broad strokes are what we're working with. But fourth step, inventory, this kind of thing, it really is about the details. And it's like, I love how you both when you're talking about it, how you get people focusing on those details. And I cannot emphasize enough too, the other thing that it emphasizes to me is something we've all talked about on here before, and that is that, I mean, throughout the steps, it's great to have lots of support, and it's great to have a sponsor. But when you're doing 4-step stuff like this, you have somebody that you trust. Be that a sponsor, fine. If it's a therapist who also is recovering, who knows how to do this, but somebody who has experience with the 4th step, who can walk you through, and people have different little ways of doing it, but it's like, it really is so important, because you become so vulnerable when you're doing the 4th step, if you're doing it right. So anyway, what I think y'all did that, and of course, Alan, I think what you did is always emphasizing the importance of emotional safety. So
Thanks, Tom. I really
absolutely,
appreciate you bringing that in.
absolutely.